All right, let's take a look at the first vertebrae we have, and that is, whoops, and that's going to be this one that's kind of flat right here, right? So right here, that's kind of flat. It's got these occipital areas, this area that's kind of depressed. That area that's depressed is going to make contact with our occipital condyles over here. So there's a reason why there's kind of a little depression. So when we put these together, you can see that it's a pretty close fit, considering that these are two models that's from two different manufacturers, right? So you see the occipital condyle from your occipital bone. It goes right into our first cervical vertebrae's depression here. Your first cervical vertebrae has a name that's pretty special. It's called the atlas, right? So think about the atlas as the strong man, right? Ever watch, or back in the days, probably when you're younger, have go through Greek and Roman mythology, and they talk about Atlas, Hercules, and those guys, right? The Greek gods, you have an Atlas that is holding up the face of the earth, the globe, right here. This is Atlas, and the Atlas itself will be hopefully holding up our skull for a long period of time. Now, that atlas is your first cervical vertebrae. It allows you to move your head in a nodding yes position. The next cervical vertebrae is this one right here, and it's called the axis. The axis contains this piece of bone called the dens process. That piece of bone allows us to spin our skull in the no fashion. So the meeting point between C1 and our occipital condyle allows us to have the yes motion. The meeting point between C1 and C2, the atlas on top and the axis on the bottom, allows us to have the no motion. Now I know, can I have you guys just almost like to kind of close that so people behind you can see? All right? So what happens is this dense process right here, right, sticks up, and it can cause damage if something happens from whiplash. You guys have heard of what happened to Dale Earnhardt. Dale Earnhardt was this kind of legendary race car driver for NASCAR. All right, during the Daytona 500, I believe in 2004 or 2003, early 2000s. Right, last lap of the race, his other kind of a race car, he's a race car owner, so his other driver had just about to win the race. What happened? He got into an accident. As he got into an accident, right, what we see sometimes and what causes death from whiplash is this. As you stop, you're driving 150 miles per hour. As you have a violent stopping motion, your head goes all the way back in a very violent way. As it moves all the way back very quickly, from 150 miles per hour to 0, it causes your C1 to move out of the way, and you dislocate C1. As you dislocate C1, this dense process right here goes into your foramen magnum, destroying your medulla oblongata, your brain stem. At that point, he would have lost consciousness as his blood pressure went to 0. All right? He could be in an ER, in an OR at that point on. Nobody would have been able to save him. He would have been unconscious within hopefully seconds, dead within minutes. By the time they got to his car, he was already dead. There's nothing they could have done to save his life. All because of what we call, right, and we do call this an internal decapitation. An external decapitation, your head is off, right? An internal one, your vertebrae is no longer attached to your skull. And that dense process goes right up into the foramen magnum, destroying your medulla oblongata, destroying your brainstem. At that point, destroying your blood pressure, which goes to 0, which will hopefully cause him to pass out immediately before he, pass away pretty quickly, right? That's the good news, right? The good news is it's pretty quick. The bad news is who knows about, what goes through your brain before you die, but whatever gets through his brain, right, he's by himself, and, There's nothing much anyone could have done to extend his life. Right. So on that great note, I know, right? Now, we do hear of people that do survive internal decapitations. So I know in California, there's an example of one. In Australia, there's an example of people that were driving, didn't have a seatbelt on, and they got expelled from the car, ejected from the car. And the good news is that when they had an internal decapitation, the decapitation caused their skull to move upwards, not laterally. Right? Because it moved upwards, the dense process didn't go into the foramen magnum. They were able to survive, and even better yet, after surgery to kind of reattach, right? And after a couple weeks and months of recovery, no permanent loss of function, right? They're able to walk, they're able to have sensation throughout their body, which is very lucky. Now, let's take a look at our typical vertebrae right here. This is our typical cervical vertebrae. Take a look at how small it is. Pretty small, right? What else do we see in a typical vertebrae right here? Right? Well, here's a cervical vertebrae. That's a very typical cervical vertebrae. And then here's a typical thoracic vertebrae. And then here's our typical lumbar vertebrae. How can we tell one from the other? Right? Obviously, besides size, but if I had these two right here, between C7 over here, between C7, this is a C7, and then T1. They look pretty close, don't they? These two. How can I tell that one is a cervical vertebrae, whereas the other is a thoracic vertebrae? Well, what we're going to see is this, right? A cervical vertebrae, all of them always have these holes on the side. Only cervical vertebrae has what we call the transverse foramen, right here. No matter how large the cervical vertebrae, they're going to have a transverse foramen. So here's our biggest cervical vertebrae right here. What do we note? A big hole on the edge. Transverse is usually equating to something that's lateral or across. Foramen for hole. Only the cervical vertebrae has these lateral holes or openings. And the reason for it is because only the cervical vertebrae has an artery called the vertebral artery that goes through these holes. Thoracic vertebrae, you don't have that artery. You don't require that hole. So here's cervical, and here's the first thoracic vertebrae. They look very similar. The last cervical, first thoracic. How can we tell one apart? Last cervical has the holes. First thoracic has no holes on the sides. And that's true for all thoracic and lumbar vertebrae. There is no transverse foramen. The reason why is there's no artery at that level. The artery starts above the shoulder. Below the shoulder and at the shoulder level, there's no artery. There's no reason to have that transverse foramen then. So let's take a look. Here's thoracic. Here is my cervical. Now, what else can we tell thoracic? Usually thoracic vertebrae, you're going to see, has a very long, very thin spinous process. This part that extends back right here is the spinous process. If you've ever given your significant other a massage, and you can go right down the middle of their back, and you feel those bones are connected to each other in the back. What you're feeling are these spinous processes from one vertebrae to the next. That's what you're palpating as you slide your finger down the back of somebody, right in the midline. Right? So we all have these spinous processes, and they usually line up so then it's like plates interacting with each other, protecting the spinal cord from behind. Have to be strong. What else do we see? On the sides right here, you see another process called the transverse processes. So that's a transverse process right here, one on each side. Again, as you're giving somebody a massage at home, I want you to do that. Just touch the sides. lateral to the midline. Right down the midline, you should feel the spinous processes all the way down. On the sides, you should feel the transverse processes. Now, these are a little bit harder to palpate, so you might have to kind of press a little bit deeper, but you don't have to press so deep. It should be there too, all right? It should not be too difficult to palpate, right? From one to the next to the next. So you do have these transverse processes on the sides. Both are required for muscle attachment, for your erector spinae muscles. That allows you to sit up, to stand up on two legs. Now, what else do we see? This area, this piece of bone that connects the spinous process to the transverse processes on each side. So this piece of bone right here and right here. These pieces of bone are called a lamina. So right here where I have my fingers, that's a lamina. That's a connecting piece of bone between the spinous and the transverse processes. Right? And that's that right here. Just these areas right here on the side.
How do you spell it?
Lamina, Lamina. It should be on your word list. So, all right. Now, what else? Right? Inside the lamina is an opening for your spinal cord. Right? So your spinal cord is going to carry all of your sensory informations from your limbs all the way up into your brain. It's going to carry all motor signals from your brain down to your limbs. All right, so it's incredibly important that it's protected. This area, this hole, is called the vertebral foramen or vertebral canal. Right here. All right, now you can imagine you have the spinal cord right in the middle. What happens? You have the bone in front, bone in back, protecting it. Right? Now, usually that's enough protection. Sometimes things can happen and you can cause damage of these bones, usually due to some kind of violent trauma. And we'll talk about that as we get into more of the spinal cord material later on. So the vertebral canal is this area in the middle where your spinal cord rests and is protected. This area on top right here, right? This is actually a little bit more anterior in our body. This is called the body of the vertebrae. The body of the vertebrae is going to have intervertebral disc. Disc on top, disc on the bottom, allowing us to separate the vertebrae. So then there's a little bit of room in between the vertebrae. So we want that disc to be nice and full, right? Because the disc is nice and full, like my thumb is in between these vertebrae, it allows nerves to exit outwards right here, right? So if I have a real big type of real full and complete disc, it allows nerves to go through the spinal cord, exit out of the spinal cord, so then those nerves can go to your limbs. Because if all we had was the spinal cord and no connection to your limbs, it's kind of useless, right? You need entrance ways for sensations from your limbs to somehow enter the spinal cord. Well, those entrance ways are nerves that actually has to enter the spinal cord. As it enters the spinal cord, then it can make contact to other nerves in the spinal cord, which sends that message up into the brain. But you need nerves that kind of brings that information in. And those nerves that bring that information in, right, require a nice open space for it to exit. And you should have a disc in between. This area right here, that's called the intervertebral foramen, is between the vertebrae, and it allows your spinal nerves to exit out of the spinal cord, so then it can run out and it can give motor signals to the muscles of your arm, to the muscles of your leg. All right, now what else do we see here? You see if you take a look really closely, you see this little foot process right here, connecting the actual body to the whole process behind it. This is called the pedicle or foot process, right here and right here. All right, now what else? You have facets that allows a vertebrae to connect to other vertebrae. So you have one on top, you have two on top right here, and then you have one on the bottom down here, right? And what happens? It allows you to communicate from one part of the vertebrae or one vertebrae to the next, right here. Right, now you can probably see it better on these that are a little bit closer together, right? So here's our thoracic vertebrae. Here's another thoracic vertebrae on top of it right here. When we put it together, you can see the intervertebral foramen, right? That's where your spinal nerves exit. Those spinal nerves exit out of your spinal cord, and it will eventually meet with other nerves to form your, right, some of the nerves you might have heard of. The median nerve of your arm, the femoral nerve of your legs, right? The sciatic nerve of your thigh. So all those nerves eventually come from these nerves that exits out. So you have the inferior articulating facet, and on top, you have the superior articulating facet. Now, how can I tell how the spinal cord or the actual vertebrae should be oriented? In other words, should the vertebrae be like this or like this? Right? Always it should be facing downwards. This is a lumbar vertebrae. We can tell by the absolute large size of the body. We can also tell by the broad nature of the spinous process. Spinous processes always face downwards. So then you have the ability to kind of cover up any gaps. So if you put our vertebrae together here, you'll notice that when you put it together eventually, you'll notice that these plates right here kind of overlap, especially a little bit lower down. They overlap and they protect by overlapping. So thoracic vertebrae, number one, thoracic vertebrae can look pretty small, so they can be kind of mistaken for cervical. How can we tell? No transverse process. Right away, or no transverse foramen. Right away, because of the lack of transverse foramen, it's a thoracic, no matter what. How else can we tell it's thoracic versus a lumbar then? Number one, size of the body. This is a small lumbar vertebrae. Look how much bigger the body is, even in a small lumbar vertebrae, to a thoracic, right? What else? The spinous process is pretty small and thin, right? So all of these help guide us to figuring out if I have one vertebrae and I ask you what type of vertebrae it is, you can tell now, right? You can tell by looking at presence of transverse foramen. Nope, no transverse foramen. Right away, it's not cervical, right? I won't ask you like the number, right? Is it C1 or C8 or something, right? Or C7 and T1, right? Now, I would ask you the difference between cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. So here, it's not big enough to be a lumbar. It's got a very thin, right, spinous process. No transverse foramen, small body. All of those are hints that it's a thoracic vertebrae. Again, all of these are hints for you guys to memorize though. Any questions so far? Now, some people, I think I had a student that mentioned this a long time ago, and she said like thoracic vertebrae, if you look at it, it kind of looks like a giraffe, right? The face of a giraffe, right? So right here, and then when you look at it, the lumbar vertebrae, you have to use your imagination. It kind of looks like a moose, right? So it's kind of weird, but any way you can have of memorizing it, I'm not going to care, right? Now, I think we got through just about everything on the vertebrae.